WNST, Capitals, and the Stanley Cup Finals. That probably sounds like like a dry erase board for in his classroom for Luke Jones. Capitals and Stanley Cup Finals, huh? How about that? I mean, one day your brother-in-law is going to get to enjoy the Sixers in the finals, maybe, huh?
Yeah, and I think back to, 1998, the last time the Caps were in the Stanley Cup Finals. I was, finishing up my freshman year of high school at that
See,
point.
that would have been the time for you to become a Caps fan. That would have been the time, but they were wearing such ugly jerseys that I didn't even root for them back then. So
you didn't like the blue with the gaudy eagle and everything?
I thought it was great on the St. Louis Blues. It just didn't really belong on the Washington Capitals, but that was Susan O'Malley's problem. So Ed Frankovic will bring that up as one of the great travesties of of modern times for any Capitals fan, and I wouldn't disagree with that. But just when you think Golden State and Cleveland are going to be in the finals, Houston pops up. So just when you think it's going to be the Penguins and somebody, the Capitals pop up. So it was their opportunity, and I know for you it's been certainly a busy week. I've been running around Tampa and Orlando and heading out to Las Vegas. First things first, the Joe Flacco thing. I know you were out there on Thursday for that. Anybody following along on our Twitter knows that you were the one up in the middle of the night tweeting about Jim Palmer and Chris Davis as well. It's been a busy week above and beyond the fact that the impossible has happened. The Seas have parted and the Capitals are playing for the Stanley Cup. And of all places, Las Vegas. But let's start, I guess, with Joe Flacco and Lamar Jackson, because that's the biggest story. Joe Flacco said something on Thursday, right?
Yeah, and didn't say anything earth-shattering. He didn't pop off in the way that Ben Roethlisberger did about the Steelers taking Mason Rudolph even in the third round.
By the way, to quote Ray Lewis, Joe gonna be Joe. Joe gonna be Joe.
Yeah.
That's Joe being Joe, right?
I mean, he expressed some disappointment that their interaction or lack thereof in the days following the draft were blown out of proportion, which I'm not surprised to hear Joe say that. He didn't say it in a disrespectful way to the media, but he basically said, hey, you guys know me, you know how I am, and I thought it was blown out of proportion, and we're fine, and our quarterback's coach joked about it a little bit, but we welcome Lamar Jackson with open arms. But that said, and that was kind of the big headline-grabbing quote that you've seen with a lot of people use with their headlines for how to summarize what Flacco said. But for me, the big quote that stood out, and this is why I've said all along, this idea that Lamar Jackson's a flyer or he's a backup quarterback, it's not just that. And Flacco acknowledged that, and he said, "Look, I don't want to say I was surprised that they took Jackson in the first round, but anytime you pick a quarterback, anyone you pick in the first round, that means something." And he said, "I don't know what that means exactly. I don't know how that's going to turn out in the future, but that's not my job to worry about that right now. My job is to get ready for the 2018 season, get on board and get on the same page with a number of new wide receivers and tight ends that are in the picture, and to try to win football games." And Joe offered that sentiment at two different points during his press conference, which predictably centered around Lamar Jackson a whole lot. More so than Michael Crabtree and John Brown, and go down the list of his new.
More so than how's your off season, pal?
Sure. I mean but that's to be expected. There's no question about that. So I think Joe handled himself well. Again, he acknowledged that, hey, taking a first round quarterback, that means something. Now, how that turns out in the future, I can't worry about that. But my job, as always, is to get ready to try to lead this team to more wins and get this team back to the playoffs. And if Joe does that and he plays at a higher level than he has the last few years, which, as and you and I have noted on a number of occasions, isn't all his fault by any stretch of the imagination, but he has to accept some part of that blame. If he does that, then he'll hold off Lamar Jackson for some extended period of time.
If he goes out and plays like a top 10, top 12 quarterback, they're not going to put Lamar Jackson on the field because he's not going to do that. I mean, I don't think there's going to be any chance for him to shine unless he's otherworldly. Is he going to take, or unless Joe Flacco completely stinks, is he going to be on the field starting a football game for this team in November, December? I mean, I just don't believe that.
Yeah, I can't say that I believe that unless unless there's an injury, unless Flacco plays a lot like he did the last few years, even with so many new weapons in the picture. I tend to agree with you. I mean, unless this team is sitting at the bye week 3 games under 500, then I think that's going to be the case. But at the same time, I think it's becoming abundantly clear the Ravens intend to play Lamar Jackson this year in some fashion. Now, I don't think that means he's starting over Flacco by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think that means he's going to be on the field some. And I do think that means they're going to have some gadget plays. And I do think that means that it might be a little bit wildcat. And that doesn't mean that Lamar Jackson won't have an opportunity to throw a couple passes over the course of a game in a given week. I think the big challenge for Marty Morningwig and James Urban and Greg Roman is going to be striking an appropriate balance between maintaining rhythm with your, quote, traditional offense that you've had under Flacco and picking the right spots, the appropriate spots to get Lamar Jackson involved, because he very clearly has a special skill set. I mean, you watch him running around now, having seen him at rookie camp, having seen him now in the first OTA that was open to reporters on Thursday. You can see this guy is an athlete and is a special athlete. And the comparisons to the likes of Michael Vick are, they're not unfounded if you watch this kid play at Louisville. So they'd be crazy not to get him involved in some fashion. But, again, you got to strike that right balance. And let's face it, let's call a spade a spade. Not like you can look at Marty Morningwig's offense the last couple of years and accuse the Ravens of being in great rhythm frequently on offense. So you're throwing another variable in there, and you hope it's another variable that can be a playmaker for you, but it's going to be a challenge striking that right balance, finding that right tone to use your, quote, typical offense, and I'm just using that for lack of a better term, and getting Jackson on the field for, I don't know, 4 plays, 5 plays, 6 plays, whatever it ends up being over the course of a 60-minute game. I'm in agreement with you that, to me, there's little debate at this point, and even just watching them on the field. Lamar Jackson looks like a rookie quarterback. You know, he had one example on Thursday where he threw a beautiful pass to Jaleel Scott in a red zone drill for a touchdown, and then 2 or 3 plays later threw a really bad interception to just a pedestrian defensive back on the 90-man roster. So he's going to do stuff like that, and that's to be expected. And Joe Flacco did that stuff his first spring with OTAs. So, that's not a knock on him, but it's just the reality of a rookie quarterback who clearly isn't going to be on par right now with a guy entering his 11th season. Now, does that change starting in the summer, starting in September, starting in October? If things go south for the Ravens and Flacco's still trending in the wrong direction, I think that conversation could change by that point in time. But right now, based on all the information we have, based on all the variables that we know, I think it's very clear, and the Ravens have made it very clear, that Joe Flacco continues to be the guy at quarterback, at least for now. Now, the future, as Flacco said, a little more uncertain, but he can't be consumed with that. He's got to get ready for the 2018 season.
All right, they're not playing any football. We got 6 more months to talk about that. There's going to be more passing camps. I'm glad Flacco came out. I said all along that he would bristle when the time came, but it would have been very easy for him to say something on the podium the day of the draft, and the last 5 weeks of this would have been it was avoidable from his perspective, right? I mean, if he wanted to avoid a controversy, it would have been easy for him to do by being quiet. He's stoked it. I think he's smart enough to know better. So, on a controversy basis, he kind of signed up for it, and the team signed up for it. The whole place signed up for it the minute it happened. So, all that being said, I don't expect it to be an ongoing problem. I didn't portray it as such. And I did reach to Joe Flacco and said, boy, at some point you're going to have to say something. Well, I guess Thursday he did. So for that, we will move on, because we have meaningful hockey being played here in the Stanley Cup Finals this week, and plenty of play-out-the-string baseball. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it all has to be bad or all has to be about dealing Manny Machado. Hey, Zach Bundy pitched well against the worst team in baseball, huh?
Dylan Bundy pitched exceptionally well.
I said Zach Bundy. What did I say?
You said Zach Bundy.
I'm out of my mind. Okay.
Well, Your eyes do start to glaze over a little bit as you're watching this team on a daily basis.
Where did I get that from? I guess that was Zach Britton and Dylan Bundy mixed together.
Oh, some
I never mixed Arrieta and Mattis up.
Man, can you imagine if Dylan Bundy had Zach Britton's sinker? I mean, man, how good would he be then?
And if he were left-handed, yeah.
Bundy was really good on Thursday, and clearly the pregame conversation from Chicago was dominated by what Jim Palmer said the night before, and I'm sure we'll get into that in the next couple minutes. But Bundy, 9 innings. I do look, and I'll be perfectly honest, pulling back the curtain, I did not get a chance to see a single pitch of Thursday's game as I was in Owings Mills with Ravens OTA coverage. But 9 innings, he gives up 2 hits, one of those 2 hits being the 3-run homer in the 4th inning, and you're starting to think, okay, well, you had a 9-0 lead. Is this thing going to get a little hairy? And Bundy settled right in after that and was really, really good. Used his curveball a little bit more than he typically does. Used his slider effectively. 14 strikeouts, one shy of Eric Bedard and Messina. Really, really good, and good to see that. We saw him bounce back somewhat after those 3 horrendous, alarming starts in a row where we were all wondering if Bundy was healthy. But then he struggled over the weekend at Fenway, which, hey, a lot of guys struggle at Fenway against the Red Sox these days. But was good to see him get back on the horse. As you pointed out, this is a White Sox lineup that's not impressive whatsoever and has now lost Wellington Castillo to an 80-game suspension.
I'd take Abreu.
Yeah, they have hey, I'd take Moncada. Even though he hasn't become the superstar yet, but he's still a young player and has still put up some decent numbers for them. But that's still a team that's been as bad as the Orioles to this point in the 2018 season. But good to see Bundy get back on track. I can't say I absolutely loved him throwing 121 pitches, considering 2 or 3 weeks ago we were asking if there's a physical issue with this guy. So, I'll at least throw up a raised eyebrow towards Buck Showalter.
Boy, he went into the hole for a couple of starts, though, right? I mean, when it came to what he looked like, it was falling apart for a while. So yeah, 121 pitches is a little. For the only guy in the organization you're trying to baby, quite frankly, right? Literally. He's the only guy you really care a lot about.
Well, Hunter Harvey, but he's down at Double-A right now. And I'll say this much in defense of Buck Showalter and the Orioles, Bundy didn't exactly have a lot of high-stress situations. He gave up the 3-run homer in the 4th and then wasn't really challenged all that much. Walked 1 batter, gave up 1 other hit. So it's not as though he was working from the stretch a lot. The weather was nice in Chicago. It's not like it was 95 degrees.
Well, it's also a nice confidence builder for him as the Bulldog to say, when you're out there, I'll let you take the ball, let you go finish this. It also gave the bullpen, 15 pitches off. Right?
And that's part of it too. David Hess is. I didn't see that they made it official after Thursday's game, but David Hess is expected to make the start. He's had some good, some bad, but. You'd like to be able to rest your bullpen a little bit when you're in that kind of a getaway day situation. And let's face it, this team hasn't had consistent starting pitching. I think when it's been good, it's been better than last year, but they've also had their horrendous stretches as well. And Alex Cobb got knocked around his last time out again. So in that sense, it was good to see Bundy pitch the way he did, give them some length. They had used up a lot of their lesser bullpen guys in Wednesday's game anyway, so you couldn't really go to them, and you want to try to use your best bullets in the bullpen this weekend against Tampa Bay and try to win another road game or two and come back home feeling better about yourselves, I guess a little tiny bit for whatever that's worth. To this point, it's scary to say it because it's not like it's been all that good, but a 3-5 road trip to this point represents improvement from what we've seen.
Yeah, they might play 400 ball this year if they keep that up.
I know, right? So Thursday, good win, and especially considering what was the overwhelming conversation before the game with Chris Davis and Buck Showalter and Scott Coolball and Jim Palmer. Nice to see Bundy go out and change the narrative a little bit, if only for a few hours.
See, Palmer couldn't have kept his job 10 years ago doing this with the old man around, being caustic and being honest. I remember the one time he accused Brady Anderson of juicing. That Brady wasn't even in the organization then, and that didn't go well. You're paid to be a representative of the ball club and keep your mouth shut. And Palmer, has had a hard time being that guy and keeping that gig for 20 years. Certainly the criticism of Chris Davis, if he's seeing things that he believes are not beneficial to a team and sees a guy making $30 million a year, and I don't think Jim wants to be the guy in line for that at his age. What's the old Lou Baker? I am too old to be diving behind the lockers, you know. I'm too old to be lying for you. You know, I don't know. Jim Palmer's in his 70s. I mean, he's an old man now who knows everything about baseball and sees these guys making money and sees that this organization's going to be hamstrung for a long, long time paying Chris Davis. And I guess he wants to see a certain level of humility and effort and all of that. And, you know, the media around here is soft on most of these guys, quite frankly. They're all good guys. They're all good-looking ball players. They're all trying hard. They all eat their Wheaties and say their prayers and drink their milk. And, you know, at some point, the criticism should be harsh for a player making $130 million and hitting 154.
Sure. And let's be clear. Media has been critical of Chris Davis, but there's only so much clout that the media has. When Jim Palmer says it, when Buck Showalter hypothetically says it, when Dan Duquette hypothetically says it, when Brady go down the list, that carries more clout than you or me saying it or someone from the Sun saying it. So when Jim Palmer speaks, because he is a Hall of Famer and because he is a former Cy Young Award winner and because he has the amount of prestige and esteem within this organization. And let's be clear, this isn't the first time that Jim Palmer has, quote, popped off or been negative about the Orioles. I think he's always been fair in the process of doing that. Is he all-knowing 100%? No, but he's a Hall of Famer, and he knows more than 99.9% of individuals that matter. So I think from that standpoint, there's nothing that he said that was unfair. I think the most interesting part of it, I mean, we've all said that Chris Davis has been horrible. I mean, there's no sugarcoating that when you've been one of the worst players in baseball for the last calendar year, and that's not hyperbole. That's statistically supported in saying that. But the most interesting part of that is him kind of pulling back the curtain a little bit as far as how much has he worked with Scott Coolball. And Davis talked about this over the winter, that they met up and worked. And Scott Coolball said that they met up, but didn't make it sound as frequent as Davis implied. So, how much of it's semantics? How much of this is needing to work harder versus needing to work smarter? Cal Sr. always famously said what? Practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. And if Chris Davis either doesn't have the means or is too stubborn or just has the wrong ideas as far as what he needs to do to get himself back on track, then that needs to be completely addressed. I mean, it needs to be addressed regardless. And that includes no longer hitting in the 5-hole, which Buck Showalter, it's absurd for Chris Davis to continue to be in the number 5 spot at this point. I get it that he's not going to be benched entirely necessarily or put on the DL right now or some extreme measure like that, which could be in play at some point. I figure he's going to be in the lineup, sure. There's no justification for him to be hitting anywhere higher than 8th or 9th. I mean, that's where it is at this point. He's their 8th or 9th worst hitter in the lineup at this point on any given night. So you have that. But to Palmer's point, where is the evidence of making adjustments? And again, I don't think that necessarily means Chris Davis doesn't care or isn't working hard. Now, does he need to work harder? Sure. I think that could be a fair accusation. And ultimately, we aren't, even in the media, aren't as privy to everything that goes into it. Even his own teammates and coaches aren't privy to everything that goes into it for Chris Davis. But could he work harder? Sure. But I think the big key is, does he need to work smarter, and does he need to start trying some different things? And I thought it was interesting, and I can't take credit for this, but noting on social media, Chris Davis, his pre-pitch approach at the plate, his stance, had the bat a little flatter against his shoulder on Thursday. What looked like he may have moved a hair closer to the plate on Thursday. So kind of a funny coincidence, don't you think, that Jim Palmer calling him out, not mincing any words after Wednesday night's game, and then even though Chris Davis expressed disappointment in Palmer doing that, his stance, his approach looks slightly different on Thursday. Just seems a little fishy there, right? And, not just a coincidence, but ultimately, the
you're making $130 million. You got to answer to somebody, right?
Sure. No question
and when you're
it.
hitting 154, it's not really about you. Then it becomes about the team. It becomes about you need to do this for us. You need to get better for all of us. And that's part of being on a team, and that's part of being on any team, I think, is looking around and saying, are you holding up your end? Are you doing your best? Am I getting an honest effort out of you? And that's the case if, you're working at a fast food restaurant making $8 an hour. I mean, whatever it is, you're on a team, and everyone is accountable to that team. And I think he's more accountable than anybody else. But I do find it fascinating that Palmer picked the middle of the night, that you tweeted about it. And I don't know if you didn't tweet about it that this would have been a story at all, right? Like, literally, it would not have been a story. You were the only one watching. Everybody else was watching shit, the Caps running around and saying nice things to me.
Full disclosure, I was watching mostly Game 7, and I was flipping to the Orioles during commercials.
And you don't even like hockey.
I'm not a big hockey fan, but it's Game 7 to go to the Stanley Cup Finals. I'm going to keep some tabs on that.
It's kind of like WrestleMania. You got to watch.
Yeah, but the genesis of it for me was I kind of just had it on. I mean, I had it on in the background. I was doing some work. I was planning out some writing and some different things, working on at WNST.net, and I just happened to kind of be half listening to what Palmer was saying, and he was going off, and of course I hit rewind on the old DVR, and I just said, wow, I mean, he's not holding back, and I decided to pass that along. So, it certainly it shed some light onto what was being said with probably what was a very small audience for a post-game of an 11-1 game, let alone if anyone was watching the game at the end of an 11-1 game. But he certainly didn't hold back, and I don't think there was anything unfair about what he said. And Palmer even cited Giancarlo Stanton. Had 59 home runs last year, and there was lots of talk about the fact that Stanton closed up his stance at one point last year for the Marlins, and it paid some dividends. I mean, it's just the reality. I mean, look at Cal Ripken is the epitome of making adjustments. I mean, this was a guy that adjusted his stance from at-bat to at-bat sometimes. That's how extreme it was. In the case of Davis, again, I don't want to just keep throwing out there that he doesn't care or that it's a complete lack of effort, because I'm not so sure that's necessarily the explanation, but it comes down to this. You can do things one way for a long time, and then it doesn't work anymore. Just like you and I probably can't eat the same way that we did when we were 25 years old and could, and someone could do that and still stay thin. That changes when you hit your 30s. That changes when you hit your 40s. What do? You have to adjust your diet. You have to adjust your exercise regimen. Now, do I think a diet has anything to do with Chris Davis? No, but my point is what worked for you when you were 25 or 27 or 29 might not work for you anymore at age 32, and that's where you need to recognize that, consult the help of others, whether it's Scott Coolball, as I suggested earlier in the week at WNST.net, whether that means bringing in another hitting guru from outside the organization that thinks they can, quote, fix Chris Davis, whether that means involving, seeking the advice of a sports psychologist if you think the issues are mental, whatever it is. You can't keep just trying the same thing over and over and expect it to change, because this isn't a slump. This isn't Manny Machado last year, who was barreling up lots of baseballs and still hitting the ball hard and just running into tough luck, which was really what most of his first half slump was about last year when you look at the peripherals. Everything about Chris Davis right now says he's broken. So are you going to continue to do the same things and stay true to your routine that you've been doing all along and you might have had success with in the past, or do you recognize that an intervention needs to be in place here? I mean, we talked about this all that when I was a teacher way back when. You had intervention plans for kids that were having their problems because of a learning disability or just was really, really struggling. You didn't just do the same thing with that kid. You tried different things. So in the case of Chris Davis, I think they need to get more aggressive. He needs to recognize this. The organization needs to take the kid gloves off, and I think Jim Palmer implied that a little bit in what he said.
Well, they're still treating him like he's Chris Davis, right?
Well, and that's the thing. And look, I would assume, and Buck Show, I haven't had an opportunity to ask him directly about this because they've been on the road, but I would assume Chris Davis continuing to hit in the number 5 spot is an effort to try to maintain some semblance of confidence that might still be lingering deep down in his mind at this point, which, I don't know how much that's worth. I don't understand how he could be confident at this point, given where his numbers are. But it goes back to what you said a few moments ago. You have to do what's best for the team. And continuing to send Davis out there is one thing. That's one discussion. But continuing to bat him fifth, like it's still 2013, that's absolutely insane. And it's unfair. Frankly, it's unfair to Chris Davis at this point, because I think, if you lower him in the order and do some different things like that, it might take some pressure off of him after the initial attention. And you need to be fair to the rest of the team. Davis has been so bad that they would be better if he weren't playing. That's how bad he's been statistically. So you have to acknowledge that, and you have to recognize that, and you can't continue to just keep trying to do the same thing and going along like everything's fine when it's not. And I think that's was a big message that Jim Palmer was sending, and I think most of us that have been watching this now, going back to really the second half of 2016, but especially last year and now this year, where it's just taken on a historical proportion of struggle, you have to acknowledge that, and you need to act, and you need to start being aggressive, and you can't keep just treating this thing like it's a 2 or 3 weeks slump and Davis is going to snap out of it at any time, because there just haven't been the sufficient signs to suggest that's going to happen without doing some different things and changing things up substantially.
Orioles in Tampa all weekend for the holiday weekend. I am headed off to Las Vegas along with Ed Frankovic. We'll have full coverage of Caps Game 1 on Monday evening from the Sin City itself. And, of course, the Birds get back into town. When are they back? They're
Monday against the Nationals, a little Memorial Day action at the ballpark.
It's still May. That's why. It's not June, right?
Hey, you know me. I love baseball. I cover the team. I watch them every night. I'm still monitoring them even when Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals or the NBA playoffs are going on. They're 16-34, man.
I knew the Yankees were here next week. I thought they were off Monday for some reason, but okay.
No, they play the Nationals and then the Yankees come into town, and that should be interesting, seeing them go up against a couple heavyweights here in Baltimore.
Trying to find the next series they can actually win. Miami's on the schedule in the middle of June, but they're an improved outfit. So everybody's an improved outfit except for the White Sox and the Orioles. All right, man. Well, rest up. Do you have any Caps stuff you're going to wear, or you're not going quite that far? Not a red shirt, anything like that, or no?
I might find a red shirt here or there. Hey, I'll say this, and look, I
have
don't
Terp stuff.
I don't pretend to be a Caps fan or a big hockey fan, and jumping on board now would be disingenuous. I'm not a bandwagon guy, but I am happy for the people in my life that are enjoying this, and happy for you, happy for Ed Frankovic, happy for the many other Caps fans in my life, and it's been fun to watch. And I'll say this: for a team that I follow it closely enough to know that expectations were not the same this year as they'd been in recent years, for them to get to this level. It's a heck of a story, and some of this narrative, it does remind you a little bit of the Ravens 5 years ago. And let's not discredit what has been an incredible story in Vegas with what's happened with an expansion team. But
the old Caps are the new Caps, and the new Caps are the old Caps.
There are so many interesting storylines here beyond the fact that it's just for the Stanley Cup. That
McPhee drafted like 35 of these guys.
I'll be watching, and I'll be sitting back, and I'll certainly be hoping that things turn out well for the people in my life that root for the Caps. And it's been a heck of a story. And if nothing else, Alex Ovechkin, considering the all-time great player that he's been, it's cool finally getting to see him be on this stage and have this opportunity to win a Stanley Cup. Definitely have to feel for that, whether you're a big hockey fan or just enjoy the narrative that sport can provide. That's pretty darn cool.
Now, this is just a question. You may know this, you may not. You and I never talk hockey. Do you know who the goaltender is for the Vegas Stars?
It's Pittsburgh.
Right,
Curry.
exactly. Yeah. So it's very easy to have disdain for him. As
yeah.
long as you know that, then you know all you need to know. Okay.
Yeah, no question. And like I said, just because I don't consider myself a Caps fan, that doesn't mean I'm anti-Caps.
Hey, I'm not a lacrosse fan, but I'm rooting for Maryland this weekend, right?
Yeah,
So
it's going to be fun. There's no question about that, and I hope you guys have a great time out there. And hope things turn out the way you want it to.
2 weeks of craziness in June. It's the greatest thing that can happen in June because there's nothing else until the World Cup starts. So I got Stanley Cup and World Cup in June, and life is good. Life is good. By the way, I'm writing some letters to the Orioles front office and to the Orioles players during the month of June as well. I've been working on that. It is a Dear Orioles series that I'm working on, beginning with a letter to Peter Angelos and John Angelos and Brady Anderson and Dan Duquette and Buck Showalter and Adam Jones. There'll be a letter a day, every day, every other day, leading up to the All-Star game that was supposed to be here that's going to be in D.C. instead. So
there you go. There you go. I look forward to checking that out.
I'll keep summer interesting around here because football starts right around the corner. You know that.
Yeah, and training camp a little bit earlier this year, keep in mind, because of the Hall of Fame game. So starting in about mid-July, they'll be on the backfields in Owings Mills. So just have to hold on a little bit longer. And meanwhile, you take the little victories like what Dylan Bundy offered on Thursday.
Well, and, we have the Bills coming in that big revenge game to start the season. They made the playoffs and we didn't. So we got to get even with them for that. All right, there he is, Luke Jones. You can find him, Baltimore Luke, on Twitter, and Luke at WNST.net. Happy Memorial Day weekend. I'm off to Vegas, trying to get it right, as they say, and trying to bring back the chalice, the goblet. Drink Tom Ebright's champagne out of it. It's a long story. You'll be hearing it over the weekend. We're going to be presenting some Peter Principles this weekend here at WNST.net, as well as some interviews with Barry Trotz over the years to spice things up and get you ready for Stanley Cup action on Monday night in Las Vegas. I'm Nestor Nasty at WNST.net. Finds me Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.